of stuck here. The cops won't bother me. Alright guys, I am going to be changing my rear brake pads on my Yamaha Super Tenere, and I'm using these Volar VBP089HH pads. They were the cheapest on Amazon and they should be working pretty well. I think they were like $22. Brake pads on the Super Tenere are very easy to remove. We are going to be removing this, and I believe they're both 12 millimeters. Using a 12 millimeter wrench, I'm just going to break this one. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to do. Just kind of hit it or use a breaker bar. There we go. So we're gonna just undo both of these bolts. And you should re-grease these bolts before you put them in, but I recently took this apart when I removed my rear wheel, so I don't really need it, but I will re-grease these bolts. Japanese bikes, everything is either 10 or 12. It's very simple to work on, and I think that's one of the reasons I really like Japanese bikes. Unless you have the tools to work on one bike, you have the tools to work on every bike. And so far, I'm really liking the way this Super Tenere, how easy it is to work on. With the exception of the valve adjustments, this bike seems to be very straightforward. So now you should be able to slide the caliper out. And this is the caliper. We're also going to be cleaning this, but we also need to push the piston back in, and I'll show you a way that I go about it after I clean it. And the brake pads are here. These are pretty much gone, and you can just slide this out, and then you slide this one out. This is probably the easiest form of brake pad removal I've ever had, but these are the old ones. You can see not a lot of left on this. It's not on the metal, so that's good, but you definitely don't want to ride your bike with very little pads, especially if you start out and you want to go for a large tour. You don't want to have bad pads. Before you remove them for the plastic, you might want to just line up all your brake pads and see if they're the exact same one. So they do seem to be the exact same brake pad size. So let's go ahead and get the brake pad out of the plastic. There we go. Very easy to put. This is probably one of the easiest bikes to install. I've never had a bike that was that easy. So there are these clips on the side. They're two metal clips. Sometimes they could fall off if you're changing your tires and stuff. Keep that in mind. And when I was changing my rear tire, they fell, and I thought, where do these go? Because normally you would have these metal clips up here on the top, but on this brake caliper, there's nothing there. So it took me a while to figure out that they go on each side, and there is a direction to it. So this is where the rotor is, where my pinky is, and that's the part that needs to be facing down. This part where my thumb is the top, because the bottom part is where the rotor goes. So let's go ahead and put it back where it belongs. It surprised me because I've never seen this on a bike, but there we go. Take both of them are the same, and you just kind of slide it into that metal clip, and it's going to hold it. So there's one, and now we'll take this, just kind of shove it in there, kind of push it up, and that's it. I mean, this is probably one of the simplest brake pad changes I've ever done. My front one is still got a lot, but I've never tried changing the front pads yet. That's something I'm eventually going to do, but that's the easiest form of rear brake pads you'll ever have. You see how the piston kind of comes out. One of the things I like to do is you can take brake parts cleaner, clean it all out. So I do like to take a rag and clean the outside and the inside of this metal piston. I don't know if it does anything, but normally it's always good to have very clean parts so they move freely. I have in my piston is just a little bit of rust, and I just kind of like to scrub it out before I do anything. So another thing to use for this is some brake parts cleaner, and you can just spray it in here just really easily. You can just take a rag and clean everything off. I like to clean the caliper as well. The piston on this usually needs to be pushed back, and an easy way to go about it, at least for me, is to use a little mini, it's like a vice grip or a little clamp, and all I do is just kind of push it in. And you want to push it in so this thing goes all the way in. Undo it. And I use this for almost all my brake pads. So now our piston is in there. We should be able to just slide it back on here. And look at that, it's perfect. This is probably one of the easiest brake changes you can possibly do. I mean, you can do this on location. So now we have our 12mm bolts. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease in the bolts. So I'll just take the bolt, just put like a little bit, and then we are ready to squeeze it in here. Put some grease. Even this, that's too much, but I think it's fine. So now all you do is just put that in there. Waterproof grease. I think this was like $11 from Cycle Gear. All we have to do is put the bolt back on there. And one of the things you should do is just kind of do this by hand. Make sure that they're threading before you start. And the caliper should have some movement because it's like a floating sort of thing. You don't want it to be really stiff. And now it's in there. Tighten the bolts using a 12mm. And even though it's pretty tight, the brake caliper should still move around. And then what I like to do is clean my caliper. And the caliper, you should actually kind of be able to move it in. You see it, how there's like a little bit of play. You should probably just pump this down a few times until it's firm. And then you should be ready to ride. That's pretty much how you change the brake pads on a Yamaha Super Tenere. This is probably one of the easiest bikes to maintain. The next step is riding it. And when you ride it, you're going to see that your brake pedal is going to be almost non-existent until you start pushing it in. So after a couple, like 10 pushes, it'll start to activate and start pushing the brake pads together, and that's the normal way. But this is probably one of the simplest bikes to work on. It's really quite fascinating. Yamaha did a really good job getting this thing ready for guys that like to do their home mechanics at home. Alright guys, I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next video.